If you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife!
In my last review of Final Fantasy VII Remake, I mentioned the common debate us Final Fantasy fans engage in from time to time. Which Final Fantasy is your favorite? It's a fascinating debate because no matter who you talk to, it's always a different game or a game you didn't expect. There's always an installment that offers something to somebody. For this video, I wanted to tell you guys about my personal favorite, but I'm kind of reluctant because it's often maligned as one of the worst of the bunch because it's just so weird. Alright, ready? Final Fantasy VIII. Now, that might surprise you, as lately I've been really getting into Final Fantasy VII and all its extra layers of lore, thanks to Sleep Easy's brilliant breakdowns. So yeah, Final Fantasy VIII is a divisive game. Complex gameplay mechanics, story pacing issues. I agree with all this. But it's because of those very things, and the particular circumstances surrounding my life back in 1998, that made me fall in love with this game. I do have a confession to make. Back in 1998, I cheated.
What?
To be completely honest, every time that I've played this game, I've cheated in some way or another. Now, before you kill me, let me explain. Back then, as a high school kid with homework, a band, hangouts with friends, a girlfriend, football practice, amongst other teenagers' things, the only way I could experience these 50-plus hour RPG adventures was to Game Shark the hell out of them, and just sit back and enjoy the story the developers painted for me, kind of like an interactive movie. And you know what? I'm just gonna say it. In regards of playing 8 and just older RPGs in general, you kinda need to cheat, man. There's so much waiting, so much backtracking, so much grinding. Oh my god, the grinding. How did anybody have time to beat these damn games? Look, although the graphics and the mechanics were groundbreaking at one time, playing them now in 2020 really shines a light on how far we've come. Anyway, back to Final Fantasy VIII. Objectively speaking, it's far from perfect. So imperfect, in fact, that I had to cheat to properly enjoy it. I mean, they just took way too many liberties in changing up the formulaic RPG systems that I had grown accustomed to. Like, let's take the junction and draw system, for example. They're just unintuitive and ultimately annoying compared to the much easier to understand materia system from Final Fantasy VII, or even the Esper system from 6. It boggles my mind why the hell they thought it would be a good idea to get rid of MP entirely in favor of having you constantly draw magic from draw points or monsters, essentially turning magic into usable items. Why would you do this? Why would you do this? MP is a universal RPG thing. You have magic points, use magic. MP drains, use up all your MP, use an ether. It rinse and repeat. As far as actually junctioning your guardians, this game's version of summons, I spent way too much time in these damn menus, selecting which ability for my guardian to learn, which abilities to add to my party members, which magic spells to exchange between my party members.
I am confusion.
And where the hell is the armor? Why get rid of armor? Armor is freaking cool. And why can't I get money for defeating my enemies? Yeah, instead of receiving money for defeating enemies like every other Final Fantasy game out there, you just get a timed stipend in which the value is based on your seed rank, which levels depend on your performance on certain missions throughout the game. Actually, you know what? That's actually kind of cool. But you can't buy weapons, you have to upgrade them with items you find out in the world, which sounds pretty cool until you realize you're halfway through the game with the same weapons you started with. I mean, look, it's not like these systems are broken. In fact, many fans enjoy the amount of options you can have with the junction system, however confusing it might be. And you gotta give it to Square for the balls it took for them to make something completely different directly after Final Fantasy VII, arguably the most successful Final Fantasy game of all time. But of course, you risk frustrating the more casual players like myself with these more complex and advanced systems. Well, thank God for Battle Boost.
I'm the fucking universe!
Now you think with all these cheats, these battles would become monotonous. With me, that wasn't the case. Between Squall's Renzo Kukin, wait a minute, isn't that Ryu? Well anyway, between Squall's Limit Break and Zell's Sabin-like duels, Limit Breaks have never looked or played better. And when you actually summon your guardians, man, you're like, holy shit. Yeah, I'm playing a Final Fantasy game. This is freaking awesome. If you thought Knights of the Round was long, just summon Eden. Dear Lord. This is freaking awesome. Oh, this is really, man, this is awesome. Okay, I'm getting kind of... Okay, we get it, Square. You know how to graphics. Ugh. We're still doing it. It's never gonna end. Oh God. I'm trying to make me feel better. Oh my gosh. Finally! Gosh. We can play the game now. We can play the game now. Jesus. So yeah, the actual gameplay side of 8 leaves something to be desired. But if you're able to mitigate these things with cheats, and you're just left with the character's world and story, then... Okay, I'm probably gonna get some hate for this, but Final Fantasy VIII's story and overall presentation, in my opinion, is superior to 7 and a whole lot of other Final Fantasies. Hang on. Guys, hang on. Whoa, 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 hang on. Put your pitchforks away. Let me explain. Final Fantasy VIII was a cinematic marvel in its heyday. It did some pretty innovative things. I mean, just look at these cutscenes. Understand that this came out just 2 years after Final Fantasy VII, where the CG cutscenes looked like this. Sure, groundbreaking and all that, but the characters still have that stunted movement about them. It's still kind of cartoony. I mean, it's great, but compared to 8's cutscenes where they actually used motion capture, you feel like you're watching a damn movie. As Metal Gear Solid first broke ground in melding cinema with action video games, Final Fantasy VIII was the first RPG, in my opinion, that did the very same thing. Ahead of its time is an understatement. And it's not just the fancy CG cutscenes that amplified this more dramatic tone. The character models seen in every part of the game, cutscenes or otherwise, proportionally look like real humans as opposed to the jaggy polygonal sprites we saw in all prior installments, including 7. Look, I adore retro pixel art as much as the next man, but let's be honest, guys. It's kind of difficult to take things super seriously when the characters look like shapes with eyes. 8 was the first time a Final Fantasy game depicted realistic-looking people, and having this lifelike proportion did several things. Helped with the cohesion of the atmosphere, environment, and overall story, assisted the player in identifying more with the characters, presented the narrative more theatrically instead of being overly, video gamey, showcased Squall's lustrous emo hair and all of its glory.
You beautiful son of a bitch!
Another feature taken for granted is that every person within your party is displayed on screen at all times, with the exception of the overworld map. This added to that feeling of venturing blindly into the world with your friends in tow, and not just, oh yeah, you guys, sup?
Sorry, I didn't see you there.
All of these seemingly small details all enhance the world Final Fantasy VIII is set in, which is one of the most immersive and visually stunning worlds I've ever experienced. The art direction is akin to 7's pre-rendered backgrounds, but they're more stylish and vibrant as opposed to the darker toned industrial vibe 7 had. And in my humble opinion, 8 really cemented the series' unique, now famous art style as that magical high fantasy sci-fi mix. I mean, the protagonist is a gunblade, for crying out loud. It's quite literally a melding of science fiction and medieval fantasy. But even though we're dealing with a fantastical world here, it has never felt more believable. For example, traveling from town to town by use of trains and cars created a sense of modern-day realism that would be emulated many, many times over in the series. In the cities, you see cars driving down paved roads. You run down cemented sidewalks. The city itself is vibrantly illuminated by electricity. Inside the buildings, you'll see modern-day inspired furniture. Televisions, radios, everything just feels so alive. Granted, 7 had all these as well, but 8's environments felt even more lived in, due to what I said earlier about the realistic proportions and greater overall cohesiveness. But all these things are just aesthetically pleasing, right? What about the actual story? There are plenty of fans out there that don't like Final Fantasy VIII's story due to its convoluted direction and overly angsty characters. It's understandable. It's not for everybody. But I'd argue that Final Fantasy VIII's characters and its story offer a great deal of nuance and intrigue for those who are willing to accept it. For starters, having our characters training to become elite mercenaries of Seed in a high school or college-like setting really captivated me, as that was an environment I was familiar with at the time, going to high school every day, and given that most of the characters were of similar age to me, I identified with all the angstiness. On the subject of age, 8 does a fantastic job in portraying how teenagers would act with such heavy burdens put on their shoulders. Damn right there would be some emo stuff in there. I would even go as far as to say that it does a much better job at character development than a lot of other Final Fantasies. Let's take our protagonist, Squall, for instance. He's a dick. He starts off as your stereotypical standoffish dude that's hiding some sort of pain underneath the rough exterior. Kinda sounds familiar, right?
Not interested.
Well, much like another emo-haired individual we all know and love, he wants nothing to do with your feelings. He pushes people away. He just wants to finish the mission and get gone.
The less I know about other people's affairs, the happier I am. I'm not interested in caring about people.
There's plenty of similarities between these two leads, but here's where Squall's different. Throughout the whole game, the player has a window into his thought process. This is how the developers wanted you to have a deeper connection with him, unlike Cloud, where they intentionally left you speculating. You have a front row seat to his growth throughout the entire journey. He's not just speaking to himself, he's speaking to you, the player. You realize with him that a person can't handle everything alone, that at some point you're gonna have to rely on others or have them rely on you. That, yes, this might set you up to be emotionally damaged further down the line, but going through life entirely without any companionship is just a much worse fate. Another major difference is that he gets a love interest. A real love interest, not a fake one like in 7. Yeah, I said it. As much as people like to talk about 7's love story between Cloud and Aerith, or Tifa and Cloud respectively, there really isn't one. Not really. There aren't any times any of these people show any affection to one another. No one hugs, no one kisses. Tifa puts her head on Cloud's shoulder. One time. Steamy. I mean, the only games that I can think of that told a true-to-life love story was Xenogears, in which Faye and Ellie actually, do the deed, and Final Fantasy VIII. Yes, you heard me right. It is a believable love story. Another common criticism of 8's love story between Squall and Rinoa is that it all seems forced. Why would Rinoa fall in love with Squall? She has no childhood background with him like the others do. He's a straight-up a-hole to her in the beginning of the game, but all of a sudden she's heavily pursuing him? I'm not buying it. Okay, valid points. But to counter, here, let me just put my Dr. Phil hat on here. Haven't you ever had a crush before? That's so stupid. But in all seriousness, when you're talking about love or infatuation in this case, here's the thing about it. It doesn't make any damn sense. When you have a crush on someone, you can't shake it sometimes, even if your brain tells you that that crush isn't a good match for you, logically speaking. So, Rinoa fell in love with Squall the moment they danced together at the Balam Garden Ball. It was, well, love at first sight. So if you've ever had a crush before, you'll understand that she'll do whatever she can to break down whatever walls Squall has up to try and convince him to see her the way she sees him. Also, you could say that Rinoa sympathizes with Squall's obviously lonely demeanor and wants to help or fix him in some way, which is, yes, sorta stereotypical, although not uncommon. And as far as Squall's motivations to love her in return, the way I see it is, look, the whole game he's only bothered himself with duty and getting the job done without getting too attached to his comrades. The mission is what's most important to him, even though it's an obvious defense mechanism. It's not until Renoa loses consciousness that Squall suddenly can't stop thinking about her well-being. This is further highlighted during the most integral expositional moment of the story, where we finally learn about our real villain, the sorceress from the future, Ultimecia. This would normally be a pivotal story beat where all of our attention would be focused, but instead, we're simultaneously drawn to Squall's inner thoughts about Renoa's health. The oh-so-important mission no longer matters to him because what difference does saving the world make if he can't save her? Okay, so it's kind of cheesy, but tell me you didn't feel something when you were trying to catch up to Renoa while she's floating helplessly in space. I'm sorry, it's just refreshing because the whole subject of love in other Final Fantasies was sort of background in regards to the entirety of the narrative. In Final Fantasy VIII, love is the central theme. And it's not just with Squall and Renoa. We have the sibling relationship between Squall and Eleni. The relationship between Laguna and Rain are what Eleni wants to fix by constantly sending her party to the past. Our first antagonist, the sorceress Ada, is married to your mentor, Headmaster Cid, in which he reluctantly, albeit is actively trying to murder her. Cypher obsessively wants to fulfill a warped chivalric dream by protecting a queen or a princess. Irvin's constantly hitting on chicks. I mean, love is everywhere in this damn game. But what I really liked about VIII's themes of love was the showcasing of the ill effects on someone when they don't have it. Especially as a child. As Sleepeasy pointed out in my podcast with him, the main writer Kazushige Nojima is no stranger to the idea of characters coming from broken homes, as evidenced with Seven's characters. In VIII, he really ran with it. Now this too is a controversial part in the story where it's argued that this orphan twist isn't effectively set up. And perhaps they're correct, I'm no writer, but what I can tell you is what effect this part had on me. It is revealed about halfway through the game that all of the party, with the exception of Renoa, all lived in the same orphanage as children, but had mysteriously forgotten about it all due to the overuse of guardian forces, which are theorized to take up the space in the brain where memories are stored. I have a different theory that I will speak on in a second. Now, this all kinda does come out of nowhere, true, but I believe it's intentionally written that way, and I kinda love it. Like, haven't you thought how crazy it would be if you woke up one morning, you had a crazy dream, and you looked over to your friend or your loved one or whatever, and you explained the dream, like, dude, I had this crazy dream, this is freaking crazy, and this happened, and they look back at you all, like, freaked out, and they said, dude, I had the same exact dream. That's how this orphan twist is set up to be. All of our characters, in the same moment, realize that they are connected with one another on a much deeper level. So deep, in fact, that all of their personality quirks, all of their vulnerabilities and subconscious traumas all come from the same exact place and time. And speaking of trauma, a criticism on how this whole scene is laid out is the near zero likelihood that they would just all forget about each other and where they came from. But actually, it does make sense if you know anything about the science behind repressed memories. Memories often of a traumatic nature that are hidden within our subconscious as a form of protection. A guardian, if you will, which is what a guardian force's entire purpose is, to protect its user physically as well as mentally. The reason why GFs affect your memories is not because of the unintended consequence of having a being inside your brain, although that might have something to do with it. It's because in order to fully guard its user, it has to protect them from even themselves by forcing them to, say, hide the childhood trauma of being without parents that could negatively affect them in the field. Just like how Final Fantasy VII broke ground in depicting the protagonist Cloud having extreme psychological trauma causing him to forget who he was entirely, Final Fantasy VIII touched on the more subtle aspects negative childhood experiences can have on us, even when we reach adulthood. Now, as far as the rest of the story, yeah, it's kind of a mess. The whole sorceress thing isn't really set up that well. You don't really know why Seed was designed to battle the sorceress until much later, so that like most of the game you have little to no motivation in fighting against her. You know, that actually might be the biggest criticism I can lay at this game, as it doesn't really have a clear antagonist until much later. In 6 you had Kefka, in 7 you had Sephiroth, in 8 I guess it's Sorceress Ada that actually used to be your caretaker at the orphanage, but it's not really her you're fighting, it's the spirit of the sorceress Ultimecia that's possessed her. But after you deal with her, then you have to deal with another sorceress named Adel in space, who if Ultimecia possesses, would be the end of life as we know it. Jesus, this is like Kingdom Hearts level writing. So yes, I'll admit that there is some just weird stuff going on in 8's story. Because it involves a lot of who, what, who's that guy, what is this, huh? It's all very, well, Final Fantasy. I mean, look, let's be honest, guys. Every Final Fantasy, even the beloved VII, has story beats that require a good amount of suspension of disbelief. With 8, you just gotta suspend it just a tiny bit more. But you know what? It's all okay, because any weird plot points are helped by the, not surprising, fantastic musical score by the legend himself, Nobuo Uematsu, which basically tells the story better than the story does. You understand what you're supposed to be feeling without having to look at the words, which I think is sorta how Uematsu wrote it. According to Wikipedia, he had to rely on the images of the character's appearance and attire to fully capture the emotional content of a scene. Eyes on Me, Fisherman's Horizon, and of course Liberi Fatali, the orchestral Latin voice introduction to the game, are still, to this day, some of my favorite tunes of the entire series. No, that's not true. They're all freaking amazing. So yeah, the killer art direction, the love story, the music, it all just does it for me. But honestly, I think what tipped the scales truly was that there was something that each character had that I can identify with. And I can't say that with most Final Fantasies. Like Squall, I get in my own head a lot, causing me at times to not be present in the moment. Like Rinoa, I know what it's like to have an intense, illogical crush and naively get in over my head sometimes. Like Zell, I sometimes say things without thinking. Like Cypher, I want to be a hero for my loved ones. Like Selphie, I just sometimes want to relax and have some fun. Like Irvin, I try my best to display a sense of confidence, but inside there's always a voice telling me that I'm not good enough, to the point of sometimes choking. Like Quistis, I'd like to be a leader, but I feel like I'm just too weary of what others think of me to be able to bear that burden. It's just that every single character spoke to me on a level that I hadn't experienced before. And playing it now in 2020, I still feel those very same things. But anyway, guys, I'm sorry that this video went so long. It's just that I wanted to get all of my feelings out there in regards to this game because it really did have a profound effect on my life. It further cemented the fact that video games not only can tell fun, action-packed, fantasy-filled stories with dazzling 3D visuals, but they're also uniquely able to immerse us, the player, with a hero's journey of loss, love, and self-discovery. And this is why Final Fantasy VIII is still my favorite Final Fantasy. Alright guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Please check out my live streams I do every week where I just jam over various nerd-related tunes. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a good one.